Hi, and welcome to the Living in Harmony Family Ministry Podcast, where parents are at the forefront of raising their kids. We exist to help families create a biblical culture in the home while navigating the culture in the world. That being said, welcome to the show. We are on podcast numero 4. My name is Delmar.
Hi, I'm Robert.
And I'm April.
And it's been chugging along. I thought last week's conversation was really good, and I think today I was looking at what we have ahead of us. I think we're going to have some people maybe upset. I think we're going to have some people saying amen. I think we'll have some people saying interesting thought. But before we get into all that, what did y'all do in your families this week?
What did we do this week? We drove yesterday up to try and find apartments for our daughter who's about to go to chiropractor school.
Yes.
So that was bittersweet, but fun. I mean, it was kind of a fun trip. Got to meet one of her roommates.
Yes, it was fun, and progress was made on the choosing of the apartment, so that was good.
Okay.
It's always a challenge when you're going to a new town, trying to do new things. We've moved a lot in our family life, but that doesn't make it easy.
Right. I have been dealing yet again with a sick family. I was sick 2 weeks ago, and what I'm learning is like when you are single, you're sick for a day. Then you're married, you're sick for a day. Then your wife may be sick for a day. When you have kid, it's a season. It's like Christmas, but it's sickness. And this week I've preached today, so I was trying not to get sick, which I got a little something, but it's not what they had. They're like stomach virus kind of thing. So 2 nights ago, this is really gross, but this is a dad story. 2 nights ago, I said, I'm gonna sleep on the couch because I don't want to get sick. And my son gets up at 6 a.m., right? I'm dead asleep on the couch. And I hear, blah.
Oh, no.
I'm like, what are you doing, kid? And he's like, what? It was just water. I'm like, no. So I'm like Lysoling my body and taking a shower. And I'm telling you what, it is the grace of God. I haven't gotten whatever they had because my wife got it, both my kids. So if you are a parent, like, you know, this is and I'm learning. This is a season. And we're here now. But the good thing is, being here now, we get to talk about something that is a more recent season in humanity as we move into our segment on what's going on in the culture. All right, so we are in what's going on in the culture, and this is a conversation that needs to happen. It's happened in other places, but I think here it's very critical. And I sent this article out earlier this week to you guys about this new survey that is really sharing how popular TikTok is with teenagers. And it goes into how it's just like decimated the traditional social media networks of Facebook and Instagram, and how it really it's tapped into something in the human mind biologically that is beyond just the social FOMO, right? That's what used to make people go on Instagram, Facebook, is what I'm going to miss out on. What am I missing out on? This new thing on TikTok, you're not missing out. Like, why are you here? And we were talking about this before the show, how it actually triggers similar neurons in your mind as fentanyl. It is like, social media fentanyl. And you can get into like the whole political dynamic of it, everything. But before we really get into this and dissect what this means for your student, your child, what this means for you, I think it's important for us to lay the land on how we got here, because 5 years ago was so different than I was worried 5 years ago. And where we're at now, I mean, 5 years ago,
We were worried 10 years ago.
you two were, I remember meeting you, and your oldest was what, a junior, maybe? Yes. So you were in the middle of it when we met. And I remember that you had a certain take on social media. And I remember some of your children not being able to feel like they were connected with other kids because of it. But now I'm looking back on it and be like, holy cow. So that's what wisdom looks like in retrospect. So I want us to talk real briefly about like how you've seen the journey of social media change just from when your kids were on it to now, because this is the first generation that is native to social media. Every other generation that has come before, we always pioneered onto it. Just like the internet. When I didn't get internet till I was 12. So I migrated to it. My children, they can't even conceptualize it's like if I was to say we don't have toilets. People are like, I can't even conceptualize what not having that utility is. But now replace that conversation of internet with social media. This is the first generation born into the ethos of social media. So I'd love to hear just how you guys started in it, how you managed it, and where you see it today.
Well, I mean, we always had from the beginning, I guess the idea that we would need to defend and protect our kids from a lot of things, and like April said, we saw the some of the dangers, even just from traditional media, movies and TV and music. We were able to see that there were potential pitfalls and potential dangers there, and as social media was just another piece of that for us initially, and a lot of the things that we're seeing now in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, we weren't really even thinking about that. We were just thinking as we're trying to bring our kids up into not just a Christian faith, but a biblical worldview. How do you think about things? How do you think about the idea of good and evil? How do you think about relationships? How do you think about all the things that you're trying to train your kids into? What are the positive influences and what are the negative influences? And so we were just very, very protective of our kids.
Well, and I know for us, when social media was becoming more of a thing, our kids, as you said, were in high school. One was in probably still in junior high at that time. And the first thing that we were looking at was Facebook. Back in the day, Instagram, I don't even think was a thing yet. But, Facebook. And I know for us, our kids had friends who were getting Facebook accounts, and when ours didn't. We held off on that for a while, and that's not a decision that we regret. And I know our children, who are now adults, looking back, they're thankful for it. They don't regret that either. But I know at the time, we were on Facebook, and I think for children, they had friends. They had friends they saw at church. They had friends they saw through, other activities and other things they were doing. And, that Facebook wasn't needed in order to keep those friendships together, And so, number one, I didn't see that it was necessary. But also, sometimes Facebook is there as a reminder for things maybe that you get left out of, or you weren't picked for, or things like that. And so we kind of looked at it and thought, I remember one time there was a Facebook post that I saw come through my feed, and it was pictures from a birthday party where I saw a whole bunch of one of my kids' friends, but my child was not invited. And I remember looking at that going, I'm thankful that my kids are not on Facebook, because they would have seen that, and it would have just been right there in their face of, yep, you weren't invited to this, but all your friends were. So I think there's a lot of those kinds of things that can happen with teenagers, and you can never convince me that that's a healthy thing for those kids to see. And, I'm not of the opinion that, kids never need to be left out of anything or feel like they're always involved in everything. But I know from talking to a lot of different students, and, I work with a lot of different students in different capacities, and I know that's something that can be harmful. That's never really beneficial for them. And staying off of Facebook when you're young is a good way to just avoid some of those hurts.
Yeah, and one of the things that is factual, and it's been brought to the plate, even Mark Zuckerberg was confronted on it, is there's data out proving that Instagram specifically, it leads to high risk of depression and even suicidal tendencies, especially in teenage girls. Yes. Because it's not just a abuse thing, it's the perfection, the filters, everything that goes into that. And as people who God has been in charge with us to raise human beings in this culture, there's a few reality checks that we have to have. Because I was just looking at statistics, 81% of all teenagers have social media, 69% of adults, right? So when we take that into consideration, the first reality check we got to have is like, this is culture. Mm-hmm. This is culture. I can't just be like, ignore it and it'll go away, because it's not a fad. Platforms may be a fad, but the social media, and it's seemingly more or less they're not a fad in the sense that Facebook's getting, it's got staying power. But then also a big reality check. Anything that's free means you are the product.
Exactly. We've been trying to get kids to
So here's a mouthful. Every one of your teenagers that's on social media is being preyed upon. 100%. Every adult is being preyed upon. We don't like to throw that terminology around lightly, but this is what advertisers are doing. This is what big businesses are doing. This is what political systems are doing. There's actually other countries infiltrate each other through social media, posing to be as extremist versions of other groups to create division. If you are being preyed upon, and part of that is because the free nature of it. You're the product. People are paying money to get their ads in front of you.
Right.
And that's a thing that as adults, I can look at that and say, okay, I'm willing to make the trade. I don't want to pay for a thing. I know I'm going to see ads, but I understand what an ad is, and I understand how, and this, something that we grew up with is seeing ads, seeing commercials on TV and on radio. Back when radio was a thing that people did all the time and it wasn't streaming. But, and so we are used to seeing commercials, but that's not the same thing as the content being the commercial, right? And so product placement in movies and TV has been a big deal, but now you've got all these social media influencers that get sponsored by certain things, and then they put stuff in, and it's a product review, quote unquote, but it's really pushing because they were given that for free with the understanding that they were going to do a review on it. And I think that goes back to something that you said earlier, which is really important. And we actually had a very interesting conversation with our two younger kids earlier this week as we were thinking about this conversation we were going to have, and just trying to get their opinions on it.
Both of whom are adults.
Yeah,
now.
both of whom are adults, 19 and 21 at this point. So, and one of the things that our daughter said was that social media, it's not real. And you said that a second ago when you were talking about filters and things like that. Everything that you see on social media is in some sense fake. We generally don't, even as adults, we don't put our entire lives out there. We put the part we want people to see. And so, that's more true for kids, for the younger kids. And they don't have the perspective to be able to recognize that they're only seeing the parts of their friends' lives that their friends want them to see. And so they see everything they see is the best possible view. Everything they see, and then they compare their own lives and they see everything in their own life. I compare my whole life, warts and all the bad things that I have and all the troubles that I'm having to what I see on a social media post, which is just the best parts of your life, and obviously your life looks better, and I think my life is bad, and then it drives me into feeling bad about myself. And you get into what you were talking about with leading more to depression and those sorts of feelings.
So, man, you just stirred up so many things because
that's his specialty.
Whenever we are teaching our children how to be on social media, it's important that we not leave the truth of God's word behind. We are not liars. And if I am falsifying my life, we are all aware of a church that's in shambles right now. But if you go visit the social media, it's like, look at yay. And it's like, no, there are hundreds of hurting, very severely wounded people, but we have this platform, we're putting out this one dimension, this lie. And one of the things the narrative, what's very true is social media try to paint everybody as one thing. And this is so important. I'm trying to teach this to my kids. It's a hard concept to get, but nobody is one thing, right? Like I may have this political view, but I may be also really nerdy over here in this other thing. And we're not one thing. But what social media tends to do is polarize people into conduits that funnel people into one ideology, one stereotype of human being. Like what's so sad is how our culture is just grasped onto it. Like a 12-year-old does not need to have an opinion on the political climate of America. They don't.
Well, they don't know enough. They don't have enough context to have a reasonable opinion on it anyway.
And if their only source of getting that is from social media,
Yes.
it's warped to begin with.
And everybody feels like they got to be funneled into it. Like I grew up loving Star Wars. I'm going to own that. I was the guy who went to Lowe's, bought PVC pipe, built my own lightsabers.
Didn't
right?
we all?
Cool. I feel much better now. But I go on internet, which I use Twitter maybe once a month. Just when there's but I go on there the other day, I was like, I'm going to see what my old hero, Luke Skywalker, do. Mark Hamill's nuts. Like half of his stuff on there is like, what? You really live in a universe far, far away with some of these things that you're saying that are just not factually true about other humans, about philosophical ideologies. And if I'm just an outsider looking in, if I'm a person who's not been coached how to analyze things, then what ends up happening is I just receive it. And one of the things I want to ask you, because I feel like this is critical. One day, if this remains in culture, your children are probably going to be on social media. I mean, they might become Mennonites. Cool. I mean, that's a possibility. They're probably going to social media. But how do I think one of the best things we could take into a social media is a grounded worldview.
Right.
If we don't take a grounded worldview into social media, then it becomes a mess. So did y'all ever intentionally help your children take their worldview into their online world?
Oh,
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. That again and again and again. And I think, and I will, just to clarify, all three of our kids do have some forms of social media now as adults, but even then they don't do much with it because it's just not that important to them. But I know our daughter was talking with us this week, and one of the things that she mentioned was when she created her Instagram account. I think she said the first thing she did was go into the settings and set some parameters, because she said it's so easy to have all kinds of garbage show up in your Instagram. And she said, I didn't even want those things popping up even once. And so she went into her settings to make things where some pretty inappropriate content would just never even come into her feed to begin with. So there's these guardrails you can put up to begin with, but
that has to be done intentionally.
Yeah, it's an intentionality. And but you were talking about students getting into social media and only seeing one type of one type of view of something. And, it kind of made me think of the fact that, so for example, I have an Instagram account. I don't think I've actually ever posted anything, but I basically, when I have some spare moments, will look at reels of cats and gardening and recipes. That's how exciting I am. But, that's a lot of things that come into the feed, just more cat reels and more cat reels. And, our daughter was talking with us about that as well. Once the social media identifies things that interest you, or it identifies things that you stop at longer, and then it's going to keep reproducing more and more things like that. And it's just reinforcing over and over that very narrow view of showing you things and blocking out a lot of other things. And
the algorithm, it works. Instead of it trying to identify what it's actually doing is developing who you are.
Right.
And we have to realize that the algorithm is saying, oh, you watch this video, you want more of this. No, it auto played. But now it's going to send me that, and it's developing. I mean, I go home right now, I go on YouTube. YouTube thinks that I love Blippi, because that's what it recommends me all day long. You want to see this new Blippi? I'm like, actually, I don't. But
because some of those, again, you are the product. So some of those are ads that are being pushed at you. Some of those are paid placements that those companies or those, whatever that company is putting in there. And sometimes, and again, back to starting with TikTok where we started, TikTok is owned by a company called ByteDance, which is at least partially owned by the Chinese government and is controlled by them. The version of TikTok, which has a different name that I can't remember off the top of my head, in China, pushes kids to museums and great works of art and engineering, and says you should be a doctor. And every so often, it'll take a 5-second pause and say you should you should put your phone down and go back to work. And it does these things. The version that's in the United States is all about dancing in your underwear and things like that. So it really, and those algorithms are designed by the companies to do that. So we are being developed and manipulated. And back to the question you asked about, one of the ways that we dealt with our kids as they were coming up, we tried really, really hard to make sure that they had an identity separate from what they got from their peers. And that's always challenging with kids. It was challenging when we were kids, and we didn't have all of this stuff on our phones, because the phones were still attached to the wall by cables. So that's how old I am. But the idea that you can say, no, yeah, we taught our kids that what they saw on social media wasn't completely real. And this was before filters and a lot of the things that are there now. But we did try to make sure that they understood their identity in Christ. They understood their identity as our children, as members of our family, that they understood who they were, and that it didn't rely on something that was showing up across an app or across a computer. And I think that was, again, talking to our kids this week, that was really helpful for them to keep them grounded. Now, they are looking back on some things. They're not remembering all of the. There were some tough circumstances that they came home at various times, and there were some things that were not pleasant. But they're looking back on it and saying all of that was worthwhile, because they look at where they are now and they're like, we're much, much healthier than a lot of our peers are.
Oh, like maybe just being teased for not having a
Yeah.
particular social media app or something.
Yeah, not having seen certain movies, and there was things that they were, that they had to deal with, but they're looking back on it, they are looking at that and saying it was worthwhile.
Yeah, and as working in student ministry for 16, 17 years now, a couple things that I've learned, and I think this is helpful for parents, is when you start social media, you're rule heavy because you need to be. Because you need to know what people are messaging your kids. You need to know what's going out there. But the nature of having a phone, your kid can let you check their account all day long. It doesn't matter because they got another account. You cannot effectively play the rule game and win when it comes to social media. Let me say that again. If you're like, well, I got Safari cut off and I got these apps, you will not effectively. Oh, I took their phone from them. It doesn't matter. There's a burner like if you have a rebellious child, who wants to do this, you will lose to that.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't.
That does not
build the
mean
rules.
Absolutely 100. It's just like the gospel, right? Like we will always fail. We will always work against what we know is good. That is why, as parents, one of the pinnacles of parenting, I hope that I'm able to get there. I've seen other parents do this, is to move from rules to, it's cliche, but to relationship, right? To where your child, there's a trust there. There's a genuine ownership in the family, hopefully in their faith, to where they don't feel like they need to lie. But if you catch one thing on your phone or you suspect one thing, there's more. Where there's smoke, there's a fire with this. So a couple things that I've seen harm students is when you paint it up as number one, here's the rules, right? Granted, we do need rules in place. That's a mandate. But number two, whenever it is just arbitrarily and not explained. When we just say, because I said so, or you don't understand, or because China, when they're on social media, they're getting a different message.
And that reminds me of, I remember this was probably, 8 or 9 years ago. There was a discussion on within the youth group that our kids were in. that the youth pastor actually had started. There was a discussion about Snapchat. It was relatively new at the time, and it was, some of the kids were starting to use it. He was kind of having a meeting to talk with the parents, just sort of like informing. This was back when parents didn't know what Snapchat was, right. But it was kind of talking about it, and we ended up taking away from that. We had conversations with our kids at the time, and that we were saying, look, Snapchat was designed so that kids can send inappropriate content and have it disappear so there's no trail of it. That was the original intent of Snapchat, regardless of what people may use it for now. That's why it was created. It was created as a way to conceal and to erase things so that you weren't held accountable. And we actually talked with our kids and explained that, and we said, there's really no reason for you to have Snapchat, because anything that you are going to put in print or any picture that you're going to send, you should be willing to stand by it and not need it to disappear. And you can do that through other means. Yeah. You can, and the idea of being able to find other people through it or arrange to meet up with people through it. I mean, that's creepy. And if you have friends that you can arrange those things. You don't have to have this app. And so that goes back to the explaining, instead of just saying you can't have Snapchat because we said. And when we explained it to our kids back at the time, they were like, we don't want that. And, and that doesn't happen overnight. You have to be intentional about teaching to your kids and explaining. And I totally agree with you. It cannot just be a list of rules. There's got to be a heart in play with it.
And some children, they're never going to come around to your opinion on it.
Right.
Some children they're not going to see your side. But I think the fact you would take the time and say, we're going to go talk about this app. We're going to talk about this app. It at least lets them know, number one, that you're informed. Number two, that you care. And in that moment when they're alone, they're tempted to do it. In the back of their mind, they're having to fight the reality that they're going against someone who cares about them. When it's just your kid and their phone or their computer, that's all they have. At that point is the you that's not present. Mm-hmm. It's the you that has been present in that moment when you're not there and they're tempted to do the thing or look at the thing or download the app. The only you that's present is the one that has been. And if you haven't been, then what's going to stop them from doing that? The guilt's still going to be there when of rebelling. The pressure is still going to be there for them to rebel. So they need to know my mom and dad's got my back. And being at what I value about what you just said, April, is you took the time. And overall, there is a level of time that goes into you. This is like the sex talk. You can't wait to talk about it. You can't. You must explain it accurately. That's why your kids need to see parents kissing, right? They need to see affection because they need to see it handled the right way, right? Or at least know they do, right? But it's similar to your parent, and this is where we get convicting. My kids need to see me using social media effectively. Oh my gosh, if my wife is hearing this right now, I'm going to have a conversation. Because the other day, somebody sent me a message on Facebook. I'm answering it at the dinner table. And it's like, oh, what am I doing right now? But that's where I fail. And I think we need to own that, like we talked about.
Well, and own that, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Sometimes that means owning that in front of your kids so that they see it. And sometimes that means your wife looks at you and says, put your phone down. And you're like, well, crap. Okay, I got to put my phone down.
Did somebody say that to you recently?
Not since yesterday. But that's, that's a thing that we can't hide from that. And I think this is one of those places where, talk to dads for just a second. This is one of those things one of those areas where fathers, forget that it's our job to protect our families. We all bow up. It's like, oh yeah, some guy comes and tries to mug my family or carjack us, and I'm gonna get up in his face. It's like, sure, great, good, do that. Be strong, be willing to protect your family physically. But there's a protection spiritually, and it's our job to stand between the bad guys and our kids in this area too. It's our job to stand in front of the threats and to be the sheepdog. And we've got to own that. And if we abdicate and walk away from that, the moms are going to try.
They're failing at, yeah.
And it's not that they can't do it, But this is one of those places that I think is the role of the husband and the father to step into that.
So many times, man, you just nailed it. So many dads are like, if somebody slides into my house, I'm going to end them. But yet, we don't even take the time to find out about that young boy who's slid into your girl's DMs. And that's a longer burn. Because if they slide in your house, it's an immediate threat. You can dispel it, whatever. If there's someone in your kids' DMs or in their snaps that they don't need to be there, but we don't have the trust built to say this is a thing or anything, then what ends up happening is this relationship is built completely behind your back. Next thing you know, you're like, why is my daughter rejecting everything? And then you start to think like, am I not? No, it's this thing that happened over here, this danger that's crept into your home. And, kind of wrap this, and this is a conversation we're probably going to revisit again later, because there's so many things we can continue to add to this. We could say this, one of the best defenses to this entire conversation, we say every week, catechize your kids, right? Teach them the truth, teach them the way, like they need to know this is evil when it's approaching them, so they can learn how to manage the current climate. So all that being said, you can watch this podcast on YouTube. You can listen to it on Spotify. We are not social media haters. We are those who say, use it for God's glory. That's what, if we could teach our kids to do that, we're winning. So, okay, you guys ready? Let's talk about what we talked about in church today. So today we were in Romans 28 through 30.
8:28.
28. Romans 8, 28 through 30. Man, it's been a long day. I preached at church, okay? And I can't even get the verses I preached right. But, I'm going to tell you, this is one of these passages, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord, that gets so taken out of context. It was so funny because I read the verse, and then I said, Pastor Joel Osteen says this, and people are like, is he really quoting Joel Osteen? And then I concluded it, and that's why he's a heretic, because it doesn't mean that, because in the context of the whole passage, even buried later in the verse, we see that the goodness here is what he's bringing to us in glory. It is nothing can stop the fulfillment of God's plan of your salvation. Amen. Where is you need strength? There it is. Oh, right now your kid is struggling sexually and transitioning. You know what? Your salvation is on the forefront of God's mind still. Okay, you got some bad stuff going on in your business world. Guess what? Your ultimate goodness, which is bigger than the dollar, is on his mind. And all of our encouragement comes from knowing the correct goodness that this text is speaking about, because we live in a subjective culture that teaches, well, goodness means I'm going to fill in the blank, but we don't get to think about it. How often do we get to prescribe goodness?
Goodness, yeah. I really think it's worth camping on just that one word of for the good, right? That, because we look at that and we think, oh, it's good for me to be happy, right? Is it always good for me to be happy? When I'm in the gym, when I'm in martial arts class and some dude is beating me up to teach me something, and I'm doing the same technique 14 times in a row because I can't get it right, is that good? It certainly doesn't feel like it at the time, but that's how you learn. That's how you get better at something. We get this so much in other areas of life that the ultimate good is not necessarily the immediate good, and yet when we see it in our spiritual lives, we're so unwilling to let God work in us through difficult times, and we're unwilling to see that.
In this text, it says that he wants to sanctify us, right? But it says ultimately the goal is to glorify. So sometimes the goodness isn't even the thing you learn. It's just knowing that it's going to work. John the Baptist got his head cut off. He wasn't learning a whole lot there, right? But you know what? The second his spirit left his body, Romans 8:28 became real for him. Because he received the goodness. He embraced the goodness. Our goodness that's promised to us is not the reward for our faithful living. Can we please just nail that down? Your goodness is not some transactional thing where God's like, here's the trade-off. I'll give you eternal glory if you tithe every single week. It's not that. All of our goodness is predicated on the righteousness and the completed work of Jesus Christ and the imputed faith on us, giving us that so we can go from dead people who are alive. And when I look at this verse, when I look at this entire context in light of being a family man, is there any greater hope you can have in your family knowing that you're raising your children in holiness in the way of the Lord, and whatever comes before you, for those who love the Lord, there's goodness set before them.
And you cling to that as parents through certain seasons. You know,
Sometimes it's all you got.
right?
Because as parents, we fail. Let's us own this bomb no one likes own today. Every one of our kids has some place where they need to grow, that if I would have been more proactive, the struggle might not be defined the same way. That doesn't mean I'm preventing them for anything, but as parents, we are the bumpers sometimes on the bowling alley lanes, and then eventually our hope is that we put the bumpers down and the balls just go down and they hit down the things. That's what parenting is. But whenever we look at it and say, sometimes the mistake is me, there's grace for that we do what we talked about in previous podcasts and how to respond. But sometimes you parent well and your kids are just not. And as a parent, you need to know your only job, Deuteronomy 6, right? We are to teach the things of the Lord to our children, put it right on the doorpost. The conversation of God should be in our home. That's your mandate as a parent. Your mandate as a parent, in God's eyes, has everything to do with the input. And then we trust him with the output. But as a parent, and I really like to park one here because I think it butts up to this conversation about goodness. How many times do we allow our worth, our dignity, and our effort to be defined by the output we're seeing in our kids that doesn't align with what we felt like we put into them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that hits for sure. And it is really difficult. It's really easy in a circumstance when everything is working well. Oh, my kid is behaving well. We're at a restaurant and someone just said, my 6-year-old is so well behaved. That happened to us once in a while. It also happened that people got up and moved away from us. So, and in that first instance, it's really easy to say, yeah, I'm a good parent and I'm a good person. And in the second instance, it's or when you have to leave someplace early, that's it. It's really easy to take our worth in that and to think that it's not, that's not really good. And so, I think it's really important for us as humans, as Christ followers, but as parents as well, to look toward that ultimate glory and recognize, like you said this morning, the glorification is not because of the things that I do. I've got a role in that. I've got a role in my own sanctification and that of my children. But ultimately, it's God's responsibility to park that, and it's God's responsibility to take it home. And there's, ultimately, if it was just me, I couldn't even get close.
Right. And our parenting is tied in with our sanctification. So that's yes. The complex part, because I want to just be a good parent. And so how many times, parent, do you beat yourself up for a mistake you made as a parent? Like, I wasn't able to make the game, or fill it in, I didn't parent well here. But yet you give yourself grace in other areas because you realize that God's still working on you. Your parenting, your ability to do it well and holy, is also tied to your sanctification. As God makes you more like him, then you will parent more like him. You'll have the wisdom that he has. So there is a level of grace that we should give.
And there's another side of that coin too. I can't tell you how many times I have had an experience as a parent and looked back and said, oh, that's what God meant by this passage. That's why that concept is in Scripture written the way it is. Oh, I get it now. I understand more about God and his relationship to me because I've had this relationship with these little people that I'm trying to create.
Yeah, so in vein of that, we talked about how Romans 8:28 is often taken out of context and said this is about you getting your best life after you are obedient or whatever. But really, Romans 8:28 is best read in the shadow of 29 and 30 because 8:28 is an encouraging verse, but the receipts for 8:28 are in 29 and 30. Like I could tell you something good's coming your way, but unless I show you, hey, I ordered that thing on Amazon, you got no proof. 29 and 30 is the proof. It's the golden chain of salvation, right? That, who he foreknows, what he's foreknowed, he's predetermined, he's predestined, he's called, he's justified, he's glorified. It's this golden chain of salvation in the sense of it's like this chain reaction of how God is in control of our entire salvation. And we see that in this passage. If we look at the first and last words, it says those who he foreknew. So foreknew, eternity past, in an era that we can't even comprehend. He always omnipotently knew we were going to be saved, right? All the way to glorification, eternity future, a place that we can't even comprehend. All of our salvation, everything is already set out there in his presence. And even in the text, what's really an alpha Chad move, as the teenagers say today, right? Is that it's all in past tense. All the words. Paul's speaking. He's like, those will be glorified. He's not even the future to us is in past tense. It's like this whole, like, listen, this is set. Let's just go. Your job's to be obedient in what he's set. And I had just full disclosure, growing up as a teenager, my youth pastor tried teaching me this, and I basically was like, dude needs to get his seminary money back because it implies some things I don't like to see about God. And it implies that I'm not as sovereign as I thought that I was. But what I have seen in ministry, especially with parents of difficult children, this verse is some of the most encouraging scripture parents have hung on to. Because what it teaches is that he's given us his calling. And it's a calling similar to when God made creation. Like he called creation into being. Guess what happened? Creation came into being. He calls us. Guess what happens? We call. I had this one parent and she was struggling because her kid was just rebellious. And she was rope burning, dragging him to church every Sunday. The more she would drag him, the more she would say, I just want him to follow Jesus. And she's crying and finally I just had to have a conversation and say, listen, we got to talk. Salvation's a gift from the Lord. And I'm going to tell you what, the next week, it was like a different woman walked into my office. I was like, how's it going? She goes, well, my prayer life's been amazing. I was like, why? She goes, well, instead of trying to nag him, I nag the Lord now. I was like, awesome. And she took the burden of responsibility that should have never been imputed on her child anyways. And she cast it back to the Lord. And you know what? Her son knows Jesus now. It took years, but, and it doesn't mean that it always works out that way, but like it centered her up. And as parents, this entire doctrine is supposed to be given as an encouragement to us. So I don't know, have y'all ever
It removes the pressure of feeling like it's all up to you and whether you succeed or fail.
Yeah, and I think, you said something in there that God doesn't always, where did I wrote it down? That he doesn't always work things out. Sometimes he does. He works things together, but he doesn't always work things out. I don't always, sometimes you have the circumstance in your life. It's like, well, I prayed for this thing and it didn't happen forever. And then it did. But sometimes it doesn't. And ultimately God, that is still part of our sanctification, part of, that's still part of his plan for us to be glorified, is that circumstance never resolves here on earth. And to me, that's one of the most encouraging things about all the things that I look around and see, whether it's, stuff happening in culture or whether it's, stuff happening in my own life, is to recognize that at some point in my future, God's going to work that out. And there's going to be a glorification and the completed sanctification in my life. And at that point, I'll look back and say, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. And one of my favorite stories in Scripture in the Gospel of John, the man who was born blind, right? And he's blind for a lot of years, enough that he could testify. Eventually he's able to testify on his own behalf. So he's an adult, and through all of that, he's healed, and that's the miracle. The story is we see that from this end, but for all of those years, he didn't know. His family didn't know what what's the problem with him. What am I doing? And up until the day that Jesus healed him, he was still living in that. And we don't know where we are, right. In any of these circumstances. We don't know if we're going to be that guy who God's going to come in and work some miraculous work in us 10, 12 years in the future, or if it's going to be something that we just live through and endure.
Yeah, and in this text, I love that it does say he works things together. Because you work out a problem, but even our problems to God are not problems to God, because he is sovereign. So, you look at Joseph in Scripture, young kid, right? Brothers sold him off. What if God would have just worked that out right there? Guess what? They would have all died in starvation before their generation was over. But instead, we see in Scripture, what you meant for evil, God did what? Meant for good. Oh, you're not allowed to say that. He meant it. He meant it for good. What's the worst evil thing that's ever happened on the face of every plane of existence in every multiverse? What's the worst evil thing?
The crucifixion, the death of God.
Yeah.
That take the highest good and the highest good and experience the most ultimate evil.
Exactly. And then I would ask you this: was that an accident? No. We have to sit in that. That sometimes things that don't go our way, sometimes decisions our kids make, ways they turn out, places they find themselves, I can look at that in misery, or I can look at that in the fullness of 28 through 30 and say, he's the Lord of all creation, of all time, and there's no problems for him. And for us, it may be a problem against my preference. I would prefer my kid do this or have this career or whatever, but it's not a problem, because God's not in the business of fixing problems. He's in the business of working things together. And I don't know, I think maybe there's a parent who there's something ahead of that, but to go, back up, because I hear Robert in the back of my head with this one, and that's fine. That's fine. We talk enough now. That doesn't alleviate us of parenting.
No.
Right? That doesn't, I can't fix it. No. Sometimes you are the means by which he chooses to work things together. We cannot overlook that. Just like in this text, those who he foreknows, he predetermined. That whole thing, that doesn't mean he doesn't have means by which he calls people into his kingdom. I was called into the kingdom at a Carmen concert. Heaven help me, right? But that doesn't mean that we get to negate our responsibility just because he's in control.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's easy. It's easy for me to attempt to fall into that fatalism. Oh, this was going to happen, and it was part of God's plan anyway for me to fall, to fail, to do that. And it's like, no, I'm still responsible for that. Yeah. And I still have to do the things. I'm still called to, and we talked about it last week, to take part in my own sanctification. And as a parent, to take part in the sanctification of my kids, my family.
Yeah, and that's why when we preach God, we got to preach the high sovereign view of God. Because if we don't preach God at all in our homes, we were raising nihilists. Everything is going to hell, literally, or figuratively. If we preach the high view of God, but not the what Romans 8 says, where he still uses us, we preach fatalism, where it's just, I'm just, whatever happens, happens. That's Westboro Baptist Church, right? This pagan church. What we're supposed to preach is, and I think this is a good place before we move on to our last segment, is it's like where Spurgeon has the illustration of the train tracks. They go down the road. If you're standing on a train track and you look down the track, they look like they meet, but they never do. And this is for me, it's a good visual aid of how God's will and man's will works. God's will is going. And if you look down the road, it looks like I'm playing this part, but we're not. But we are, because the train rides on both. But it's God. That being said, all right, real quick, I need some advice. We had a storm in Sumter this week where we're living, and a lot of people's power went out. So, in our last couple minutes, as we get out some tips, what are some of the best things to do when the power goes out in your home?
Well, first, you get out your phone and you get on social media.
And tweet that my power's out, or
my
Facebook.
Well, I know some things that our kids have done is they love candles. They love to pull out candles and light candles and have a little bit of light for that. And they've been known to just play spoons. Pull out a deck of cards, pull out some spoons. I have pictures of them when the power was out, playing spoons by candlelight in the living room. I know another time they went and grabbed guitars. Our family, we are musicians, and music is a big part of our kids' upbringing and things. And they would go and grab some guitars and maybe some percussion things and sit around the floor with candlelight and have praise and worship time in the middle of the power out.
Oh, wow. That's a high standard. When our power, I want to get there, because right now when our power is out, it's like we're playing hide and seek.
Absolutely. Well, that too.
No, it's all a part of the same thing, But that's a good point. Is like idleness. It's such a good. You can make a memory. That's really a thing. When the power goes out in your house, it's an opportunity to make a memory.
Yes.
And one of a couple of things I did growing up, or we do with the kids, is the power goes out, play hide and seek, or you can build those forts.
Well, absolutely.
Or you can go have a fire in your backyard, which is really awesome this time of year.
Unless it's out because it's raining outside.
Yes. but I will say this, and this is no judgment cast. If the power goes out, you just roll over and go to sleep. But I would hope, my biggest thing I think would be cool is the next time power goes out in your house, what's in the back of your mind is like, oh, here is my providential moment to make a memory with my kids.
Yep.
And they'll talk about that when they get older. They'll talk about what they used to do in the power.
Lots of distractions going, because even if your phone has battery life, you don't want to run it down, right? You don't want to be the people where the power's out and your phones are dead.
Right. So, all right, everyone. Well, this has been very helpful today. We will see you hopefully next week. My name is Delmar.
I'm Robert.
And April.
Have a great one.